Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. As you might have noticed, I've moved to a brand new location, which is why I wasn't able to put out a video last week. But don't worry, I'm sure at some point I'll put out two in 1 week to make up for it. But also, at some point during the next couple videos, you'll probably hear an airplane or two, because this new place is in a very busy flight path, which was conveniently not disclosed to us before we moved in. So until I can get some acoustic foam into this window and just kind of all around everywhere, it's just something I'm kind of gonna have to deal with. But anyway, some time ago I did videos on the state of every single PlayStation and Xbox first-party studio, so it's time I did the same for Nintendo. Let's get into it. I should mention I won't be talking about IQ Studio because it seems like they really just do Chinese localization and ports, and I also won't be talking about Vitae because while it has them listed as an affiliate company of Nintendo, I couldn't figure out why or what exactly they do, and I'm realizing now that I probably didn't have to mention that I wasn't going to talk about those two studios, and no one would have known because no one knows who they are. But unlike my Xbox and PlayStation videos, I will be talking about second-party studios, because if I didn't, then first of all, this video would be like 6 minutes long, and second, it would leave huge gaps in the Nintendo lineup. You'll see what I mean. But with that in mind, we have 19 studios to get through, so we better get going. First up is Nintendo Entertainment Planning and Development, which, because it's such a terrible name, is usually shortened to Nintendo EPD. This is by far the largest division of Nintendo, spread across two different studios, one in Kyoto and one in Tokyo. It's the home of Eiji Aonuma, the guy who does Zelda, Katsuya Iguchi, the guy who does Animal Crossing, and Hisashi Nogami, who does Splatoon. This single studio is the core developers for Zelda, Animal Crossing, Star Fox, Super Mario, Mario Kart, and Splatoon. Just to put that into perspective, that means that Breath of the Wild, Mario Odyssey, Splatoon 2, and Animal Crossing New Horizons all came out of one studio. It's insane to think about when this is just the first of 19 on this list. We know that they're currently working on Miitopia and Skyward Sword HD, both of which are set to come out this year, 2021. Splatoon 3, which is set to come out in 2022, and Breath of the Wild 2, which doesn't have a release date, but hopefully is also 2022. I'd like to play that game sooner than later. But because it's such a huge team, I think it's safe to assume that they probably have a couple unannounced projects in the work too. Most likely another mainline Mario game, and almost certainly more Animal Crossing content. Number 2 is Nintendo Software Technology, or NST. They seem to mostly do ports like they did with Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, or support work like they did for Snipper Clips, but they do occasionally make games of their own, like Metroid Prime Hunters or Mario vs. Donkey Kong. Most recently, they made the Bowser's Fury half of the Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury thing, which they co-developed with Nintendo EPD, who I will, from this point on, be referring to as the main office because it's easier for me. They have a really inconsistent work schedule as far as like making games of their own as compared to doing port work or support on other things, so it's really impossible to tell what they might be working on next, but they have been a part in one way or another of a game that came out every single year since 2015, so they are absolutely working on something that will come out this year. I just don't know what it is. Number 3 is 1UP Studio. They haven't made a game entirely by themselves since 2010, and that was something called Lively Garden, which I have never heard of, and frankly I doubt most of you have. But they have co-developed some really big name games like Mother 3 with HAL Labs, or Mario Odyssey and Animal Crossing New Horizons with the main office. Unfortunately, because they tend to do support work as opposed to making games of their own, they could be helping really any of the other 18 teams, and there's no way of predicting what they might be working on. Number 4 is Monolith Soft. This is the team that does the Xenosaga and Xenoblade games, and their last game was Xenoblade Chronicles 2, which they released in 2017. Since then, the only things that they've put out are a DLC expansion for that called Torna the Golden Country, and Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition, which is a remaster of the original Xenoblade Chronicles game. Looking at their release schedule, they tend to put out a game about every 2 to 5 years, meaning that we should probably expect to see a new Xeno something coming out of them in the next year or maybe 2 because of COVID. Number 5 is ND Cube. They made the last couple Mario Party games, specifically Mario Party 9, 10, and Super Mario Party. And since they started doing the Mario Party games, they haven't really done anything else of note, and they seem to put out those games about every 3 years, so seeing as how Super Mario Party came out in 2018, we can probably expect to see another game coming out of them pretty soon, and it's almost certainly going to be Super Mario Party 2. Number 6 is Next Level Games. This is the most recent addition to Nintendo's first-party lineup, because even though they've been making Nintendo exclusive titles since about 2013, they were only officially acquired earlier this year, January 4th of 2021, which is weird because I feel like I didn't hear about that at all, so it must have either completely slipped my mind or flown completely under the radar. Regardless, this is the studio that put out Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon in 2013, Metroid Prime Federation Force in 2016, and Luigi's Mansion 3 in 2019. So if we follow that trend of putting out games about every 3 years, we should expect something new from them sometime next year, and I think it might be a Metroid Prime spin-off like Federation Force, and I'm sure a lot of people would be thrilled to get that, because Metroid fans really need some love. Number 7 is Retro Studios, which is both the last studio on this list that Nintendo actually owns, and probably the Nintendo studio that I knew the most about going into this. Almost certainly because they're here in Texas. But they're the creators of the Metroid Prime series and the most recent Donkey Kong Country games. And it seems like they have multiple teams since they frequently put out games in short order, and because we're currently in the longest pause that they've ever had between releasing games since they were founded, that says to me that they're either doing some really crazy stuff with Metroid Prime 4, which they've already been announced to be working on, or they're working on multiple projects at once, which would mean that they're almost certainly also working on a Donkey Kong Country game. From this point on, every single studio I'm going to talk about is not owned by Nintendo. Some of them have a certain percentage of their stock owned by Nintendo, but most of them just have some kind of long-term partnership. And the first of them is number 8, Camelot Software Planning. This was originally a Sega studio that did all of the old Shining Force games, but since about 1999, they've been doing all the Mario sports titles, which I personally don't care about, but right now they're working on Mario Golf Super Rush that's supposed to come out pretty soon, and here's a fun fact, Camelot Software are the original inventors of Waluigi. Number 9 is Creatures. They were the original creators of the Earthbound series, but after the first one they only co-developed it with HAL Labs, who ended up taking basically the leading role in production of those games. Since then, they've made the Pokemon Ranger games, Shadows of Almia and Guardian Signs, but mostly they're just a support studio for the other Pokemon games. They do all of the 3D models for those games, and I assume that they're doing the same thing for the Sinnoh remakes and Pokemon Legends Arceus, but I wouldn't expect them to be making a game of their own anytime soon. Number 10 is DNA. They make all the mobile games like Fire Emblem Heroes, Pokemon Masters, Mario Kart Tour, etc., etc. And apparently they own an extremely famous Japanese cell phone platform called Mobage that I've never heard of, but apparently makes a ton of money. Regardless, there's really no telling what they're going to make next. It'll probably be a spin-off mobile game of something that's released on Switch recently, but I have no way of predicting what that might be. Number 11 is Cygames, and they really only make super niche anime mobile games that I've never heard of, and I really doubt that most of you have either. Honestly, I probably wouldn't have put them on this list if not for the fact that they so perfectly exemplify how confusing it is to try and keep track of what studios Nintendo does and does not own. Nintendo only has 5% stake in Cygames, but DNA owns 24% of Cygames, and Nintendo owns 15% of DNA. So how much of Cygames does Nintendo own? This is what I've been dealing with the entire time trying to make this list, and this is the most perfect example of it. Number 12 is Game Freak. If there's one studio on this list that you've heard of, it's probably Game Freak, because they've been making the Pokemon games since I was 2 years old. So, kind of a big deal, and I was surprised to find out that Nintendo doesn't actually own any amount of Game Freak whatsoever. They just have a long-term partnership. The ownership of Pokemon in general is really confusing, but I won't get into that because that could be a video and probably will be a video all on its own. The important thing for this video to understand is that Game Freak is currently working on Pokemon Legends Arceus, which looks fantastic. But I should mention, they are not working on Brilliant Diamond or Radiant Pearl, the Sinnoh remakes. That's being done by a studio called ILCA, who is not in any way owned by Nintendo either, and who have in fact never actually made a game before. They helped with some great games like Yakuza 0, Dragon Quest XI, and Nier Automata, but boy could they not have chosen a more heavily scrutinized game franchise to make their debut with. Best of luck to them. Number 13 is Genius Sonority. They got their start making Pokemon Coliseum and Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness, both of which were really great games. But since then, they haven't really done anything noteworthy, and their most recent game, Pokemon Cafe Mix, is just a match 3 mobile game. So while I'm sure they're working on something, I can't imagine that it's gonna make waves. Number 14 is Good Feel. They made Yoshi's Woolly World, Yoshi's Crafted World, and worked with HAL Labs to do the Kirby's Epic Yarn games. And according to Wikipedia, they are currently working on an unnamed samurai action game, which I guess will somehow involve craft supplies, since that seems to be their thing. Number 15 is Grezzo, or Grizo, I'm not really sure, but they, as a studio, didn't do basically anything of note up until they released the Link's Awakening remake back in 2019, but they're right back to doing things that aren't really of note since they're currently co-developing Miitopia with the main office. Number 16 is Van Pool. They've done all the Dylan's Rolling Western games. They did Freshly Picked Tingle's Rosy Rupee Land, and they helped with things like Mario and Luigi's Superstar Saga and Paper Mario Sticker Star. The last game that they put out was Kirby Fighters 2 last year, but they co-developed that with HAL Labs, so it's not impossible that they are also working on another game of their own, and in that case, there's every possibility that it's a new Dylan's Rolling Western game, which I don't really know if anyone would be looking forward to another one of those games, but it can't hurt. Number 17 is HAL Laboratory, and I probably should have put them higher up on this list because I feel like I've already said their name about 10 times, but going into this, I didn't recognize the name until I saw the logo, at which point I realized that I had seen this logo probably 100 times because they make all the Kirby games. They've co-developed the Mother series since Mother 2. They did the first couple Super Smash games, and the place that I recognize them from is from Pokemon Snap and Pokemon Stadium. Their most recent game of note was Kirby Star Allies, which released in 2018, so we can assume that they're probably been working on something else since then, and realistically, it's definitely a Kirby game. Number 18 is Intelligent Systems. They are probably best known for doing the Fire Emblem series of games, and they most recently did Paper Mario Origami King, which came out last year. So normally I would be saying that we probably won't see another game out of them for quite a while, but Intelligent Systems has since 1983 put out at least one game every single year except 2. So there's probably going to be a game that comes out this year from them, and personally I hope it's another Fire Emblem, because I just really like Fire Emblem. Last but absolutely not least is Sora Ltd, the Sakurai company. This is the team that makes Smash Brothers, which I was personally really surprised to find out that Nintendo does not in any way, shape, or form own. Regardless, though, we can probably assume that Sakurai is just going to continue adding new characters and new content to Smash Bros. Ultimate until he dies of exertion. So expect another Fighter's Pass, or maybe 2, or maybe I'm way off base and he'll put out a whole nother game in a couple years, although frankly, I think that would be a little disappointing after all the work he's put into Ultimate. So there you have it. That's every single first and second party studio that Nintendo has. And I hope I was able to present it to you in a less confusing way than I found it, because man, getting all the information for this video was kind of a hassle. If there's anything that I left confusing or ambiguous, go down in the comments and let me know so that I can try and clean it up. And while you're down there, I would really appreciate it if you gave this video a like, shared it with a friend, or better yet, subscribe to the channel, because your support really does mean the world to me. But until next time, I'll see you around.